Castlevania is one of the best series ever made, but it's also one of the most difficult to collect for. Here is part 1 of my collecting guide for the entire Castlevania series, or at least the games that I consider to be part of the Castlevania series. I'm your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, and if you'd like to see more videos, exclusive videos, about Japanese game collecting, you can head over to my Patreon. When I say what I consider to be Castlevania, I'm going to be talking about the mainline console. Well, first it's home consoles, and then it will be like Game Boy Advance and DS, but essentially the 2D Castlevanias that are really good. Those are the ones that I'm going to focus on. We're going to go through the first 5 games in the series, and I think we've got loads of history here, and I'm going to be comparing the American price with the Japanese price, and that actually can be very key, because Castlevania is one of those weird series, it's one of those exceptions. Usually the Japanese versions of retro games are cheaper than their American counterparts, but that is not so in the case of Castlevania, and there's a lot of reasons why that is. But first I want to start off with the first game, the launch for the series. It is 1986's Castlevania. Now in Japan, this is available in both cartridge and disc-based format. If you are going to buy an American copy of Castlevania for the NES, that is only going to cost you $23. But that cartridge is going to come in a couple of different forms in Japan. There is the original 1986 release, which was for the Famicom Disk System. And that often comes without the manual. With the manual, it can be upwards of $50 to $60 if you're in Japan. Now, if you're buying it on eBay, that can be anywhere from $30 to $50. I found a bunch of different listings for it. The thing you need to know about that Japanese version for the disk system, though, is that you're going to be loading every once so often. And what I found when I play disk system games is that oftentimes when I've replaced the drive belt, oftentimes you're taking a risk every time you load the game. So just because the belt will slip off of the drive. So if you want to play Castlevania and not be afraid that you're going to ruin your disk system, you'll want to go for the cartridge version, for the Famicom. Now, the thing about in Japan is that the cartridge version came out years later. It was part of this Konami push to re-release some of its Famicom disk system games as cartridges. This was in the era of the 80 Famicom. The Super Nintendo had already come out, but Konami figured they were just going to come out with cartridge versions of their old games anyway. So this includes one big game was actually the Nintendo released Zelda. Castlevania came out, and then there was one other Konami game. It's like about a baby platformer. It's worth like $1,000 now. It's really expensive, but a cartridge for Castlevania in Japan is going to cost you more than $100, and that's also true on eBay as well. In the box, I've seen a really roughed up box go for about $200. Sometimes if you're in Tokyo, they can be $400 or $500. It's really expensive in Japan, but it is so good. Actually, Castlevania 1 is so good that I had originally not really been a big fan of the Castlevania series, because to me, growing up, it was like the 3D versions, and then I had Harmony of Dissonance for the Game Boy Advance, and I thought, it's okay, but it didn't inspire me to get into the series. But a couple years ago, when the NES Classic came out, I played it on the Famicom Mini, and I was like, wow, this is great, and now I need to have every Castlevania game that ever came out. Maybe kind of wish that didn't happen, because I would have saved a lot of money. I'd have a lot more money than I do now. If you are a die-hard Japanese retro game collector and you want a physical version of the original Castlevania, you can also go for the Game Boy Advance release, which was part of this early 2000s batch of games that came out to sort of celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Famicom, and that Castlevania version will be more than $25, but not much more than that, either whether you're buying it in the country or you're finding it on eBay. Moving on, we then have Castlevania II, Simon's Quest. Now, interestingly enough, in Japan, this is only available as a disc, as a Famicom disc, which is really unfortunate because I'd love to play it, but I also really don't ever want to play a Famicom disk system game ever again, just because, again, that drive belt issue. In Japan, a disc can go anywhere from $30 or more. I've seen it maybe even upwards of the more specialty shops going for about $50 if it has the manual. But in America, thankfully, you can just get a cartridge for about $13. It's very cheap. Now, the American version has been the target of much ridicule from such storied characters as the Angry Video Game Nerd. It's one of the few Castlevania games that I've not played myself, so I cannot give you my personal opinion on it. But I'm sure, especially if you're playing the Japanese version, I'm sure it's fine. And although I hear that actually the Castlevania II, the reason it's very cryptic and doesn't make a lot of sense is because even in the original Japanese, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And that was on purpose by the designers, apparently. So my only recommendation is that, yeah, you could probably skip Simon's Quest. But hey, if you're buying the American version, at least it's going to be cheap. Castlevania III is, I think, one of the best entries in this series, and I think is the best Castlevania game for the Famicom. And this is a time where normally I would even recommend getting the American versions of these games just because they're going to be a lot cheaper. But the Japanese version has like some upgraded sound chip on the cartridge, so the music is just so much better for the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 that I would recommend just going on eBay and getting that Japanese copy because, and I think there's some censorship involved in the game. I'm not sure. I don't actually care that much about the censorship as I do about the improved sound quality of the Famicom version. Complete in box, it's really expensive for the Japanese version. A cartridge version is $60. And maybe that's because it's more sought after for that upgraded sound, whereas the American version's, I think, like $33 when I checked the listings on eBay. So yes, the American version is cheaper, but I think the superior version is just going to be that one for the Famicom. If it weren't for Rondo of Blood, I would say Super Castlevania IV is the best, I think, iteration of sort of 2D pre-Igavania Castlevanias. And I mean just your traditional, you're going from left to the right, you're going on a very linear path to finish the game. You're not going around and doing all that Metroid stuff of getting upgrades and things and exploring a castle. You're just going in a straight line, you're having a lot of fun, but you're still just going in a straight line. And interestingly enough, Super Castlevania IV, there's not actually that much difference between a cartridge price for the American and the Japanese version. You're going to pay about in the mid-30s either way. I highly recommend this game, especially if you're playing games for the Super Nintendo. Castlevania IV is one of the best games that ever released for the system. It's the only issue with it is that Rondo of Blood is just so good. Rounding out this episode of the Castlevania Collector's Guide is Rondo of Blood, which is, bar none, the best 2D traditional Castlevania. I'm thinking, pre-1995 Castlevania. It is Rondo of Blood. The unfortunate thing is that it is for the PC Engine CD, meaning that you're going to have to shell out. So let's just get to the original price of it, which is, if you're lucky, you can find it for less than $100 if you really search around, but really, you're most likely going to be paying anywhere from $150 to $200 for a decent copy of Rondo of Blood. But that's not even the true price of the game, because if you want to play it with the original physical copy on the original hardware, you're going to need to get either a Turbo Duo or, say, a PC Engine Duo, or what I would recommend, a PC Engine Duo R. And those things, if you're in Japan, it can be $200. If you're getting it off of eBay, you'd be lucky to find it for that price. So if you really want to play Rondo of Blood, if you don't want to have it just sit on your shelf, you're going to end up paying $400 just to play Rondo of Blood. Now, the PC Engine has a lot of great games for it that you can also buy, and they're also kind of expensive. But unfortunately, I don't think there's even really another way to play Rondo of Blood. There is the PSP, it's like the Castlevania Chronicles game that came out that is like a remake of Rondo of Blood, and I think if you clear certain things, or if you clear the game, you can end up getting a ROM on that PSP game, but then again, you've got to play it on the PSP. So there are other ways that you could play Rondo of Blood. It might actually have come out on the Wii Virtual Console. That actually escapes me for the moment. But there are other, perhaps more legitimate, some perhaps even more nefarious ways of playing Rondo of Blood. I believe Rondo of Blood is one of the best games in this series, but is it a $400 game when you get down to it? I don't know about that. It was for me, just because I had a PC Engine Duo. But man, $400 for Rondo of Blood is really steep. What I consider the first 5 games in the Castlevania series are some of the best games ever made, and I highly recommend that you, in one form or another, play these games. There is the Castlevania Anniversary Collection that was released for the Switch, and I think it's actually on Steam. And there will be a physical version at the time that I'm recording this. It's been announced for a limited run. However, there's no details on when it's going to come out or if we're even going to be able to buy it, because you never know with limited run releases whether you're actually going to be able to pre-order it or not. But still, these Castlevania games are great. And even in some cases, when we're looking at them 25 years later, I think are some of the best 2D action platformers that have ever and will ever be made. There's still a lot more games that we have to cover in this series, so I hope you will tune in to the next episodes of the Castlevania Collector's Guide. I have been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra. Thanks for watching, and mahalo.